What's up, guys? DT here from Bags. Welcome to episode 2 of the Cash Pod. We've got Ignacio and myself. William will be joining. She's just classically a tad late. This is the reality of having three founders, not two. But yeah,
Or just the reality of the New York public transport system.
don't make excuses for them. Don't No
Okay,
excuses. That's
we'll
this is
we'll, we'll
this
give them
is
that. We'll give them maybe like a 10% New York subway system,
yes, discount.
90%. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Track your discounts, y'all. Discounts are very important. Uh, so yeah, today we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of the 101s of financing and funding a CPG business specifically. It's consumer packaged goods, not product goods. I used to mess that up all the time. But basically, any business that is selling a physical product likely to consumers would be considered a CPG business. Sometimes you call them brands, CPG brands, etc. But this is a really, really important category for us here at Bags. It's one of the fastest growing segments that specifically like Black and Latino women are starting businesses within, which is a real, real focus of why we do the work that we do. Um, and as we get to talk a little bit more about these businesses, the category, you'll end up finding and likely hearing why financing makes a lot of sense, why financial management is extra important, um, and why, you know, optimizing this thing called a cash conversion cycle can potentially be a make or break for a lot of these businesses. And so, you know, that's what we're going to dive into today. Keep it tight, go through a few questions. Iggs and I will go back and forth, and will jump in. Iggs, anything else to add?
No, I just think it's funny. This is like a space that I didn't think I would end back up in, and by me back, my
Yeah,
parents have been,
give us a short
yeah.
story. Yeah.
Oh well, sure. I'll give you two stories. One, my parents have been in CPG pretty much my whole life, and so the things that we talk about on a daily basis, I've been hearing about from my dad in particular, since I have like a memory of dinner, and dinner conversations with him. It's just like cash flow, inventory management, cash conversion. Um, really marketing spend, like all these things that like we know are critical and so important to founders now. I just like that kind of teenage thing that you like wave off of, like, yeah, yeah, it's just my dad's job, whatever. And now I'm like calling him up periodically like, hey, um what do you think about X, Y, or Z situation? So it's cool to be back here. And yeah, I think I did have a foray as a CPG founder. You know this story well, DT, if you can call it that. But I sold bootlegged Crocs when I was 13 and 14 in Ecuador. So I'm excited to talk about how you actually do it properly now.
At some point, we're gonna just do a pod on our first businesses because I think they're very telling as a whole. Interestingly, my connection to CPG was actually my first tech startup. Um, we started in the fashion tech space and then we pivoted to help brands acquire customers. And so I kind of saw firsthand the realities of the difficulties of marketing a CPG brand, but also scaling and growing. And at that time, we were in an environment where the direct consumer boom was happening, meaning brands were selling, rather than selling just to retailers, brands were building brands that were selling directly to customers online, and trying to build real customer loyalty and affinity, whilst leveraging all the advertising platforms that were out there. Now the environment's a little bit different, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, and then William has been a CPG nut. Funny enough, his dad's actually in the third party logistics business as well. And actually, all three of our fathers were entrepreneurs, which kind of I guess makes sense as to why we kind of all ended up here, which is pretty cool. But first topic of conversation today is talking a little bit about like trying to get into the mindset of a CPG brand owner, and sort of the 101s around what are the first things that you should do when you're thinking about funding the growth of a CPG brand. And I think it's always worth to kind of start with how these businesses make money, because that has a lot to do with, how they should be thinking about financing. So Iggs, or maybe even I can jump in. Oh, wow. Look at this guy. Mid-recording, he's here. Shirt's tight. Got the necklace. Looks great. What's up, Will?
Surprise, y'all. I'm in a very loud place, so if the audio is terrible, please abide me.
It's actually pretty good. So hopefully we'll be all right. Will, we were just telling a little bit about our connection to CPG, and we were just about to dive into like talking a little bit about how these businesses actually make money, because I think in order to understand how to fund and grow a CPG brand, you need to start with like, we've defined what CPG is, but we also need to like dive into like actually how these businesses make money and through what channels, right? And so I'm gonna throw you under the bus because you're right here. You showed up late, so you got first question. How do CPG businesses make money? Talk about making of the product, where they sell their product, and then how they actually capture money in order to potentially make a profit.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's some slight variation to all this, but as a general matter, a CPG brand comes up with a product within a category, and their job is to sell that tangible product to an end customer. There's nothing special. Can you sell the thing to somebody? Now, who you're selling it to is a factor. How you're making it's a factor, and how you get it from point A to point B is a factor. So when you're setting the price of the product, it's not just, to an extent, everything follows the rule. Like the price is whatever someone's willing to pay for it. But if you're a CPG founder, you have to be factoring in most cases, the fact that you don't make the product yourself. You hire a third party manufacturer, sometimes called a co-man, to produce that product for you. You got to pay them for the product. Then you have to ship that product likely to your 3PL, third party logistics company. They're going to do your fulfillment, your packaging, all that good stuff. So that's going to be a shipping cost. Then you got to pay fees to your 3PL for the labor and the execution of the shipment. So by the time you are selling the product to a consumer on the internet and shipping it to them, maybe they'll pay for shipping that time. You've paid two other companies and a shipping company, three other companies, and you still need to be profitable at the end of that. So what are you thinking about when you're trying to make money? Like, how do you make money? The way I'm hearing the question is, how do you make sure you're profitable at the end of the day? And the answer is, you make sure that you develop a product that you can charge enough that many different people can get paid on the way for it working and everyone to walk away happy. In terms of who you should sell it to, right? Selling over the internet is a very popular mechanism. There was the D2C boom. We've also seen the
Yep.
D2C bust. The reality is that Amazon really has a corner on that online market, and the vast majority of transactions still take place offline in retail locations. So the other alternative is to sell wholesale to retail providers. The risk there is that they are really slow to pay. They pay on delayed pay terms, and major retailers, not naming names, and some of them behave great, but for the most part, really take advantage of their small business customers. So it's a rock and a hard place in a lot of cases. But someone who's savvy and has a good omni-channel strategy, starts local and make sure that they're getting the sales that they're able to get, is gonna have fun, at least I hope.
It's a thing, right? Like you can, in both pathways, selling direct to customers and selling through retailers and distributors, profit can be made. But a one core component of that entire sort of flow of money is you've actually got to take cash out of your own pocket, right? Put it into inventory. And that essentially doesn't come back to you in terms of revenue, depending on either channel, for a period of time. That could be a long time. That could be 3 months. That could be 6. That could be 12, depending on the business, depending on the product, depending on how much you move product. And the determining factor in regards to how you actually move product is making sure that you have what? Marketing dollars left over to actually sell the product, right? And so when we were thinking about the pain points of businesses that we wanted to serve, we really wanted to think through which customers were going to really hit some sort of ceiling where if they're not smart about their cash flow, if they're not able to properly incorporate financing into their business, it'll make it really, really difficult for them to scale. And we'll definitely touch on a couple stories within CPG of when that actually happens, and how it makes it difficult for these businesses to actually proceed, right? And what essentially I was talking about a little bit there was the element of a cash conversion cycle. Because you want to give like a just a quick recap on what exactly cash conversion cycle is for all the people listening, as I'm sure they're likely facing it as owners themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Cash conversion cycle, I think at the highest level is how quickly you can go from having inventory to converting that into cash, which is just like breaking down all the steps that William went through was like, how do you make that cycle or that timeline as quick as possible? The reason that's important is because of what DT was saying. That gap between you putting in some cash to create your business or build your product or whatever it is, and then receiving the cash to keep running it. The longer that window is, the longer you are kind of fronting that money, the shorter it is, the more, I guess, like working capital you have to run the business. That's it. You can get super technical of like days of, you're holding inventory, days to sale, and then days to payment essentially. But at its core, it's like, how quickly can I go from like, having this phone to selling this phone to getting paid out? Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that cash conversion cycle and everything we're talking about, which is really sad, is that sometimes you can, I think William was getting spoken to in the middle of a podcast recording, which is lovely.
Shout out Christy Coco.
Shout out Christy Coco. Oh yeah, but I think just like kind of to touch on two things that both of you were talking about, which I think is really interesting about the cash conversion cycle, is that your success can sink you. And that's, I think, something that like why it's important in cash flow management and why it's important to get it right from the beginning is because your cash conversion cycle when you're small is quick, right? Like if I'm selling t-shirts online, I'm doing it on Shopify. Shopify is going to pay me out every day, every 2 days, every 3 days, right? Like within a week, I'm getting paid. So I can reinvest that into producing more shirts and marketing my shirts and selling more shirts. But if I get an order from a large wholesale account or from a big box retailer, those orders are amazing. But they can sink your business because they require a ton of upfront investment and the cash conversion cycle is bigger or is longer. So the bigger the sale, the longer the cycle. Yep. And that's where we've seen a lot of businesses kind of struggle, which is kind of the saddest thing ever to me. It's like you're doing well, your product's well, you're selling well, you don't have to market too much because it's like something people want to buy. And because it's something people want to buy, your business dies, which is just like so counterintuitive. And I think that's the kind of obviously one of the problems and challenges that we want to tackle. But beyond the financing, I think like the beginning of that is having that visibility on your cash conversion cycle, knowing how it extends over that kind of growth curve, and then figuring out how you're going to fill the gap. So yeah, cash conversion cycle and the saddest success story of all time.
Yeah. It goes back to Will's point, which is you got to make sure that you actually have a real strategy if you're going into something like retail to get your products off the shelves, right? Because the real sad story is when you have that opportunity, you're in stores, products don't move, and a retailer might force you to buy it back. And it's not about that first purchase order. It's about being able to fill that first purchase order, move the product, get a second, get a third, get a fourth. And then really it's about that 10th purchase order down the line that will really determine the success of your business and making sure that you can sustain that growth over time. Iggs, you brought something up that I wanted to segue to anyways, which is the element of ensuring that you have a really strong hold of your finances, right? And it's one of the reasons why we as a business kind of made that adjustment of just helping businesses build a debt strategy to helping to build a more substantial, financial management and financial growth platform. Well, why is it so important that brands have a really strong hold of their finances, both from understanding their own business's success, but also from a like funding their growth perspective. And man's muted. Unmute.
Now I'm not muted. Um, yeah, I mean, a quick story here is that met a business one time who was doing millions of dollars a year, really great business, but not profitably. So not sustainable in the current model. There was a bunch of financial cleanup to do. It took some work to get back under the hood, and once we got it done, it was really quick to determine that a $3 million channel for the business was unprofitable. So someone was buying $3 million a year from her. Uh, at the end of the day, she was paying, more than $3 million to make that happen. Well, that's going to be a problem. And I think that that is a microcosm of the visibility that also creeps into access to capital, where a business that wants to access capital necessarily has to meet some criteria. And if the business owner doesn't have a basic handle of the financials, it's going to be really hard to go and sell that vision anywhere to an investor or a lender. And furthermore, lenders are spending most of their underwriting time anyway reformatting accounting data. So if there is just one inaccuracy, if there are certain vagaries, if there's something that's miscategorized, it's making one line item look worse, that will be a really easy way to decline, because lenders are risk averse. They are trying to avoid bad bets, and someone who doesn't have clean financials just seems like a bad bet. Because if they're not managing their financials today, why are they going to manage their financials when they have a $150,000, $500,000, $1.5 million liability on their books? And so it's just at first, it's a great way to put your best foot forward. And then it's also going to help keep you in business and avoid making bad business decisions.
100%. And I know we've already sort of dove into lenders and what lenders are looking for. I think it's probably worth even touching on the reality of CPG venture in the current environment. I know we talked about that a little bit in the last CashPod. And maybe I'll just speak to this. I think the core, if you look at the direct consumer boom and then the bust that has now followed, which has included, a bunch of companies that grew really, really fast and used venture funding to fuel a lot of the inefficiencies around their cash conversion cycle and funding inventory in a way that wasn't innately profitable. Spend 100 million in order to make 60 million. Wait, that math isn't mathing. And so, what has the outcome of that, especially in an increased rate environment, is one where venture within CPG is investing less frequently in companies. The variables for the requirements for uh, uh, a potential investment have increased pretty significantly, and they are no longer willing to fund things like inventory or marketing spend, right? They want to ensure that those dollars are really being used for additional R&D and long-term growth in the business, right? Which in turn has forced a lot of brands to think critically about how they fund their growth. And it's why we're so focused on debt being the appropriate solution to fund that growth for brands, especially when we think about tightening that cash conversion cycle, and especially when we think about sort of enabling more cash flow within the business. Eggs, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Actually, I wanted you to dive in a little bit deeper there, like
Hmm.
because I think R&D is kind of this abstract term, especially,
Yeah.
right? Like just like kind of break it down for us, right? Like what would you put, in an example business, like what are you going to put your money towards to if you have VC capital in CPG, or even just like honestly like a family loan or like a friend's loan or something like that? Like how would you, if I'm giving you, call it 100K of each category of funding, how are you splitting up that money? Because I think
That's
you
a
have a
really good
really good
question.
perspective, and I'd love, make up your business. We do Daniel's Donuts on the platform as a fake business, but I think maybe something more.
We're gonna do Daniel's juice. which is a category that William loves so much, which is beverage. We'll talk about the intricacies of beverage. First of all, I always like to start with if there's a way without spending money to drive more revenue, start there, right? Like at the end of the day, revenue is what should fuel the growth of your business, right? And optimizing around that is really where I would start, right? But assuming, Ignacio, I've already got a product that people want that I've sold to a certain subset of customers, and I've identified that there's a way to continue to sell to them repeatedly, right? Assuming I've got those things, which likely means I've got my, call it first $100,000 worth of revenue, right? Through maybe two channels, a little bit of e-commerce, maybe through a couple of smaller stores. Um, and so how I would be thinking about the split between uh, and I want to make sure that we're subcategorizing correctly, right? Like I've got a venture check for 100 grand. I've got a family and friends loan, right? For 100 grand. And I've got some sort of financing, right? Let's call it more short-term financing. Let's call it specifically financing for inventory that I would think about. I would take the financing dollars that are shorter term and I would focus those dollars in helping to fuel and shorten my cash conversion cycle. Meaning specifically, I would put those dollars in to things like inventory, right? And then help to ensure that if, for example, there's any sort of pain points relating to when I'm going to get paid, I've got a bit of capital to sort of weather that storm, right? And so that's how I'd be thinking about the shorter term capital component. Will, we're going to have you talk about debt stack in a little bit, the ideal debt stack for CPG. Um, and then how I'd be thinking about the next category, which is that family and friends loan, let's call it $100,000. I would look at those dollars specifically still as a way to drive more revenue, right? A way to fuel marketing spend, a way to actually ensure that more people are interacting with my product, buying my product, etc. Right? Like even though that might be a longer term loan that's a little bit more patient and fixed monthly payments, that's great. But I would really, really look to allocate those dollars to help drive more revenue from a marketing perspective, one, and two, ensure that I can get through the natural seasonality of my business, right? Because in reality, most businesses make 60% of their money within Q4, right? So I want to make sure that I've got the budget and the foresight to be able to last through the off season. And that's where I would revenue unlock, marketing dollars, and then help deals with some of that seasonality. And then the last category, which is that 100K of equity dollar, I would think really strategically about and it's either within the specifically the brand, not necessarily spending $100,000 on a $100,000 marketing agency or branding agency. That's not what I'm saying, but thinking about ways that I can better the individual product that I have currently and advance that product specifically as it relates to brand, specifically as it relates to thinking about my supply chain to some degree. But really, I would try to reserve that capital as much as possible. And then I would look at specifically, if it's only 100 grand, I'm not really hiring much of nobody. Maybe I would look at someone who would drive more sales, right? Because that person, if they're driving more sales, there should be an ROI between their time and increased retail exposure and increased sales. Fine. But at the end of the day, like marketing your product, given you have a product that someone wants, is paramount one, two, and three, and then making sure that you have the systems in place to manage it appropriately is really, really, really important. Will, I don't know if you have any
Yeah, I love
differing thoughts. Or go
Actually,
ahead, Ixie.
I'm gonna remix the question for Will. I'm like, if we remove venture and we have no family, no friends that have money to give us, because that's literally the
Mm,
conversation we have on a weekly basis with a bunch of
yep.
founders. It's like, my family's trying to make their thing happen. They're not gonna give me money right now. And I've spoken to 300 venture capital firms, and they've all said no or not responded.
Yep.
So like, if you don't have that, right, but you do have the revenue, right? Daniel's Juice is making a lot of money. Maybe the margins aren't great, but the cash is flowing. Well, what's that ideal debt stack look like?
Yeah, so I mean, it really comes down to what the sales channels are. And, we have retail, so we're going to need a whole bunch of cash. And I mean, it really comes down to something that we talked about earlier, which is the cash conversion cycle. So it takes 3 months to squeeze these grapes into the juice. It's like a very delicate process that happens by hand. And over that 3 month period, Daniel's juice is being bottled, and it's not Daniel's not doing it. He's not squeezing it himself. The co-packer's doing that. So Daniel has to pay the co-packer 100 grand to produce like 250K of saleable inventory, but he's also going to have to pay for shipping and warehousing and logistics all through the cycle. But when the major retailer comes to buy the juice and they offer that $250,000 PO, Daniel can use PO financing, except for that they say they need it within 2 weeks. So if Daniel hasn't already produced the inventory, he's not going to make the order because it takes three
Yep.
months and they want it in 2 weeks. So he actually can't just use PO financing. He needs to use inventory financing so that they can advance produce the stuff. He's still going to want to use PO financing because at that point it's secured against the retailer's credit and not his business credit. And while there are some retailers who have negative credit, most of them have great credit. That PO financing is going to get slightly cheaper. And so even though it's just being used to pay off the inventory financing, it's worth it. And then as soon as that PO is fulfilled, so then, within 2 weeks, uh, you have proof of delivery, you send an invoice to the retailer. Now you can jump into invoice financing or AR financing or AR factoring, which are three different ways of saying the same thing. It's not traditional factoring. Don't go researching terms too much. But what it basically is a monthly interest charge for the duration of the period between when the retailer receives the invoice and actually pays it off. Sometimes it's net 30, sometimes it's net 60, sometimes it's net 90. Sometimes they're really, really late and obnoxious, but it'll be a cheap rate because that invoice is even more secure. So now we have three different loans. Sometimes one provider will do multiple of these, but you have your inventory, your PO, and your AR. Most businesses also should probably have some form of term loan or line of credit that they're using to manage sort of the day-to-day cash outlays, things that might come up, contingencies, and some of their marketing. To go national in a major retailer is going to cost, probably hundreds of $1,000s in marketing to do it the right way. But most people don't have that. Growing really, really deliberately before you have one of those national efforts in a specific market is a great way to like test, prove your concept, understand where you're going to be investing, and term loans from a local CDFI can be a great way to get some budget at a really great rate. So, I mean, in that model, you're going to have four potentially five loans in the business. But if you think about it, the way that they all work together to advance cash conversion and reduce the amount of money that Daniel's Juice has to spend in order to scale, because instead of spending $100,000 out of pocket, he can use $500,000 of debt and produce 5 times the amount of inventory for 10 to 15 times the MSRP value. That's scale, and that's where it starts.
And that $500,000 of the debt hopefully turns into $1.5 million worth of revenue, right? Like that's really the correlation that we hope to replicate. And by the way, if you don't want to figure all that stuff out yourself, shameless plug, use Bags. That's what we're here for. We will help you build a debt stack, understand how debt can be a powerful tool towards funding and fueling your growth, especially if you're expanding into retail, how to tighten that cash conversion cycle, and then ensure that you've got all of the financial visibility to make the best decisions possible for your business, whilst not just looking at where you're at today, but also looking at where you're going to be going in the future. We've got 10 minutes left. There's two things. There's actually one thing that I want each of us to do, which are one piece, and it doesn't have to be finance related. It doesn't have to be funding related. But one piece of advice you would give a CPG founder that's thinking about or trying to grow their business today.
Yeah, I can jump in there. I
Go
think
ahead,
like
Ix.
I think just listening to the conversation we're having, if it sounds simple, I guess, but it's not. And I think that, like acknowledging that it's tough to manage these things, it's okay, right? Like, I think, we used to say things like, hey, get clear on your numbers. This is really important. And that's the most easier said than done thing that I've like ever heard. Because like we say it a lot.
Big facts. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, and I think even for us, right, like with our business, if we look at it retrospectively a little bit, like I think we thought we had a good handle of our numbers until we started like using the stuff we built. And then we were like, oh wait, this is way more visibility and way better. And like, like we're a business that does this. So I think my first piece of advice is around like grounding yourself in the basics of these important things, which is just like, like get a don't start with weekly, right? Like do a monthly view of your financials. Get super clear on what that is. If you don't know how to get started, just like figure out how much money you're spending and how much money is coming in. Like just like start with the smallest piece of that puzzle and then work your way down. Okay, what are the inputs into what I'm spending? What are the inputs into what I'm making? And then start to make the right optimizations in terms of just like cut out the stuff that's super expensive and put more money into the stuff that's making you money. Um, and I think that's it for me. Obviously, I'm going to have a data bias. I'm going to be like, get visibility on your data, get good with your data, get close to your numbers. Because I think that getting close to your numbers also makes you ask yourself really good questions about running a business. And makes you take really tough decisions with a little bit better justification, right? Like if you have 5 SKUs or 5 products, and one is just like you get to the numbers and one has just been in the red for 9 months, all of a sudden the decision to cut that product, even though it's your favorite flavor of juice, is easy, right? It's like I'm losing money on this every month. Um, Whereas otherwise you're running the business a little bit more emotionally. And I think it is important in terms of like the energy and the drive and that creative force to like have the emotion behind a business. But when you're, dealing with the very fine margins, pun intended, of CPG, you got to do it, I think, as analytically and like cold-blooded, for lack of a better term, as possible. Because I think that's what helps you succeed, and that's what opens the doors to essentially growing your business on somebody else's money, which is where you want to get to. Yeah, all about the numbers.
Willie, pass it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a laundry list. I should probably write like a 47 pieces of advice for a CPG founder article. But number one piece of advice, no brainer. It's obvious. Don't lose money. When you are in a business category where you have a product that people pay for, you like cool. If you have a company that is inventing something that's going to change the face of the universe, but it's going to take you 7 years to invent it, lose money. If you have a product that you can sell to people, don't lose money. Especially in this market, we saw a 0.5 point rate cut yesterday. It's encouraging. Cash is going to get more available, but overwhelming shifts in how underwriting happens took place, and people want to see profitable. Investors want to see profitable, and profit should be attainable. Now, this means sacrifices. It means don't try to be a national brand from day one. Cool. It's easier to market in one place than seven, right? There's enough people in New York to have a massive brand that doesn't sell outside of the radius from Canal to 14th Street, Broadway to 6th Ave. You could have $1 million brand that doesn't sell outside of those blocks, multi-million. So don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. Stay profitable, make money. That's what we're doing this for, isn't it?
Agreed.
That's what I got.
Uh, Damn, I don't even want to go because those are both fire. Okay. And I think this draws a nice line between the two of both of your perspectives. It falls under the theme of building a venture-backed business doesn't make you a good business. It might feel sexy, but in reality, the sexiest type of business is to William and Ignacio's point, a profitable one that could sustain itself. And the underlying element that we often see sink a lot of business is don't hire too early and too quickly, right? We have multiple multi-million dollar brands who have a team of 4 to 5 people, right? You do not need to get all this money to go into the market, to hire a bunch of people, to sustain a bunch of salaries in order to build a brand profitably, sustainably, and a brand that scales, right? I've been in the seat where I've had to walk into a room and fire a bunch of people because I thought I would raise that round to be able to keep things going. It's not a fun conversation, right? And I think the culture around how businesses are being built today with the element of urgency and efficiency and staying lean will be the important and effective culture for businesses to build going forward. And I think the tooling that business owners have access to now versus 6, 7, 5, even 3 or 4 years ago is far and beyond what it used to be and will allow for the compounding impact of a single person to be able to cover a lot of territory, right? So don't hire too early. Don't spend that much cash on personnel. Every dollar you pump into someone's salary, if that's not coming back to you with 5 to 10x return on their time, that was not a good investment, right? So stay lean. Don't spend a bunch of money on a bunch of people. Stay profitable. And just because you think you want to build a venture-backed business, it doesn't mean that's your recipes for success. And in today's market, the recipe for success is not that. It's a lean business that's funded and fueled on debt. One where you manage your finances appropriately, and you keep the flywheel of cash conversion tight to fuel your growth. Sweet. And that's all from CashPod number 2, all things CPG. There are other categories of business that we will cover in the future. And we got some balloons to celebrate. But thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you for your time, for listening to the things that we've learned along the way. And remember, we are the 3 founders of Bag. Some people call us the Bag Boys. This is the Cash Pod. Bag's a platform for financial growth. If you need to talk, want some perspective, and even just want to get an understanding of whether your finances right now are good enough, hit us up. We're here for it. We really do try to help whenever we can. And look forward to seeing y'all on the next one. Deuces.